Hey there, my name's Misha, and I'm the solo indie dev for the PC game Shivering Hearts that was released back in July, and I have to say, I still can't believe I've made this. A lot of work went into this. Development started back in September, and what started off as a small 1-month project turned into this beast of a thing over the past 12 months. Development was all self-funded, which is also something that I'm very proud of. So I wanted to create a series of videos to explain certain parts of the process. I've learned so much from the past 1,100 hours that I've spent on RPG Maker MV, a lot more actually, along with the hundreds of hours outside of the software through drawing and image editing, audio mixing and video editing. There's just so many aspects. So I've been trying to make a game for the past few years now. For Shivering Hearts, this all began when I came across the developer diaries of Yahtzee, renowned game critic, who started this YouTube series back in 2019. A very important note that I took from his videos was the idea of creating a working prototype within 1 month. That way, you're not committing months or even years to a core concept that might not pan out in the end, which is something that I can wholly relate to. So I created a working prototype back in August last year while juggling a full-time job, which then became the skeletal framework from which I built the rest of Shivering Hearts from. Shivering Hearts was originally a much grander project in my head. I was wanting to essentially recreate the Baldur's Gate 2 experience within RPG Maker MV, because I saw a lot of aspects of Baldur's Gate 2 that could easily be brought over to RPG Maker. This included having the player recruit multiple party members, engage with large, sprawling quest chains, an in-depth combat and magic system, and a large city to explore with multiple districts that reflected the general socio-political climate. But after concepting and prototyping the build, it became apparent that I bit off a lot more than I could chew, especially for a solo project. So I chose to scale down. Also, by forcing myself to create a functioning prototype within 1 month, this also meant that I had to focus on a much tighter design and to work in a way that emphasized my strengths while covering my weaknesses. I had to ask myself, what was the core design for Shivering Hearts? What did I want the player to feel, essentially? I also had to consider what I could realistically achieve as one person and how I could complete such a project within my free time. After completing a short experience within the month of August, I created the Skeletal Prototype that would later become the framework for the rest of Shivering Hearts. And I just kept working on it, and 1 month turned into 3 months, and then 8 months, and now we're here after 12 months. This really did get out of hand. When developing Shivering Hearts, and figuring out what I wanted to achieve with this first game, I narrowed it down to these 2 points. First, I wanted to nail an engaging experience without using combat. And second, I wanted to push the aesthetic boundaries of 2D role-playing games by combining traditional drawing and painting with RPG Maker. Now the first point was wanting to create and nail an engaging experience that doesn't rely on combat. This was a self-imposed challenge of sorts. Realistically, I knew I couldn't spend every waking hour of my life developing this, even though I would love to do that. On top of a full-time job, there's all sorts of different life obligations I have to balance. So I felt that I had to really focus on specific aspects of the game and really nail it and just get it as best as possible to my standards. That sadly meant cutting out a combat system and focusing my efforts at crafting an intricate dialogue system instead. Also, despite nailing the visuals being an important part of Shivering Hearts, having good visuals for a game doesn't necessarily mean that you'll get a good gameplay experience. While it makes for pretty screenshots, prioritizing graphics can often come at the expense of further developing the actual gameplay. You have to nail the gameplay first, which then acts as the skeleton for the rest of the experience. In fact, throughout the large majority of the development of Shivering Hearts, I was only using the base assets provided by RPG Maker. The visuals were added 8 months down the line. So, on the subject of creating an engaging experience that doesn't rely on combat, which is what the large majority of games are traditionally built from. Now don't get me wrong, I very much enjoy gameplay loops built from intricate combat systems through many different genres. For example, one of my favorite games of all time is Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3. This game tests reflexes and smooth, precise movement, efficient resource management and space control, and it requires a high level of technical execution from its players, especially to pull off these touch-of-death combos which the game is heavily renowned for. Like, this is amazing, it's fun to watch and fun to play, and you feel like you're just on top of the world. I'm still going. Foot dive. You have no hope. I love Doctor Doom. I find so much joy in both Japanese console RPGs like Suikoden 2. I just recently discovered this game and it's incredible. Along with classical Western RPGs like Baldur's Gate 2 and the turn-based system of Fallout 1 and 2. I would love to design and fine-tune a combat system that really caters to my level of difficulty. But in the end, what I found most important was to craft a satisfying conclusion. And this meant creating a meaningful and engaging story from beginning to end. And that meant having a dialogue system that allows for player input and reactivity. That was the most important thing to me when creating Shivering Hearts. Many games end up having stories that just frankly suck. Or they don't live up to their full potential, because their stories end on unsatisfying cliffhangers and unresolved plot threads. Then again, unsatisfying conclusions and having a lack of closure to long-running narratives isn't an exclusive problem to video games. Oh, I kid. It's still a good show. I love you, Hugh Laurie. Please don't die. Another reason why I wanted a story that had closure was that if on the off chance that I just stopped doing game development for whatever reason, life is unexpected and all that. But if I do, then I would at least be glad for this tale to have some degree of finality, while also having some unresolved questions that I could keep working on.
Where to now, fearless leader?
So if I didn't have combat, I thought, what would I find engaging? Because I'm only working for myself as a baseline. That brought me to my experience with narratively complex RPGs like Baldur's Gate 2 and the original Fallout 1 and 2, Fallout New Vegas, Planescape Torment, and Dragon Age Origins.
Yes, one could expect no less from a Shem. This will not take long. Well, shall we see if there's any truth to this story?
These games have intricately detailed worlds and dialogue systems that allowed for heavy characterization and role-playing. And I mean proper role-playing. Games that certainly guide you through their stories and their worlds in a linear-ish fashion, but they respect your choice. And those choices are reflected in the multiple ending screens which illustrated the fate of the world and the characters you got to know. Now, there lies a potential trap. When a designer focuses on dialogue systems or choice-driven gameplay as a primary loop to push player experience, there's the tendency to focus too much on how the experience can branch out and account for a multitude of player options. But to try and sell a game where every choice has long-term consequences is a recipe for disaster. You're fighting a losing battle as a developer if this is the main experience you want to craft, and it creates a set of unrealistic expectations within the heads of players. These expectations are very reasonable to have because you're told by the developer, oh, your choice can do this, your choice does that, you better be careful. But when you go back and analyze how your choices affects the narrative, it often comes up short. And it's a shame. This might be a strong word, but as a player, you might feel a sense of betrayal from the developer. And as a developer, you feel like you've tried your best and it's still not enough. You're focusing huge amounts of resources into these branching paths, and it's very, very likely that the large majority of players won't see or even appreciate the branching, nor will they care enough to go back and experiment with different possibilities. That's certainly how I felt when playing games like The Walking Dead, Witcher 3, Until Dawn, Heavy Rain, the list goes on. Despite having fun with them in the moment, no developer can account for every possibility. But maybe that's just the reality to accept when creating these branching narratives. So the question is, why did I stick with this potentially flawed starting point? Well, I wrestled with this a lot. And for me, the reason why Baldur's Gate 2 and Planescape Torment are still the best games ever created, possibly of any media, is that it's not really about the navigation of choice and consequence and how it's tracked long term. Rather, it's how these gameplay mechanics allow for a greater exploration of the game's themes and questions about spirituality and the self that isn't just told to the player through a cutscene. I wanted to recreate the same magic that enraptured me as a kid and even now as an adult. It's about building empathy and getting you involved in answering these questions for yourself and who you can trust in an uncaring world. It allows the player to be directly involved with the characterization of the protagonist and provides ample opportunity for role-playing. I don't know why I find this so funny. In saying all this, while I do think it's important for dialogue choices to allow for moments of characterization instead of tracking consequences, I think that's a little bit overrated. I also think I have achieved a great deal of reactivity in the plot of Shivering Hearts. More so than certain games like The Walking Dead and Fallout 3. You know, I still love the first season of The Walking Dead despite a few gripes. And I can completely relate. Creating and bug testing this insanely intricate web of decisions and having it not hard crash the game every 5 seconds is extremely difficult. So how did I achieve this with my game? So there are 5, debatably 6 ending screens that change depending on player action, which allows for a plethora of player options. I just said that tracking long-term consequences is a bit overrated, and I did it for Shivering Hearts, but I'm still pretty proud of the fact that I could do that, and how RPG Maker MV can let me create something like this. Certain characters can die, or you can bypass certain events depending on how you interact with them. For example, a lot of players won't even see the nighttime area of the game because I intentionally hid that within a dialogue branch. Characters can join your party depending on certain actions, and I've also written unique dialogue for about 90% of the choices, even if that little bit of dialogue is just a bit of acknowledgement to the player. So even the more mundane choices have unique options. Now, while I think I was successful at balancing telling a conclusive story while accounting for a lot of player options, I'm finding the limits of working in this way. By focusing a majority of my time on writing and exploring themes and characterization, this helps me develop the world, but in the end, I'm not making new content. Even by spending over 1,000 hours drawing, writing, learning about different software, I think I've only created about 3 hours of content for a single playthrough. I've seen people even complete it within 1 hour, which I'm extremely flattered by how engaged they are. Maybe it shows how good they are at reading rather than a reflection of me as a developer. But it does present itself with a problem of diminishing returns, and I think the next step is for me to figure out a way of working that can provide more quality content for the player. Sure, personally, I would rather have a short, quality experience rather than having an experience that just drags on and on and on and becomes so mind-numbing to get through. But I think it's about finding a balance. Even though I have the amazing RPG Maker community to help me through any of my issues, I'm still working by myself in the end. I think that developing an engaging combat system as well as other mechanics that can synergize together would help increase playtime and player engagement. I would love to show what I've been working on, but I think I would have to save that for the next video. The second important point for me was to push the aesthetic boundaries of 2D role-playing games by combining traditional drawing and painting techniques with RPG Maker. For a very long time, there have been very specific ways in how games are represented. This is a very simple overview that ignores a lot of nuance, But in the early days, games used sprite-based pixel art to represent their worlds, and this was due to hardware limitations. The tradition of pixel art still lives on to this day and is brimming within the indie scene. As technology increased at an exponential rate, this led to the industry prioritizing 3D modeling and animation as the holy grail of how games should be represented. And then there are games which use 3D assets to recreate a 2D style, which both impresses and confuses the hell out of me. Oh, I love Johnny. This game is so good. I love both styles of representation in games. They are whole schools of art, worthy of respect and study. However, to me, what still impresses me the most about games regarding visuals is the original concept art from which these games are drawn from. For example, this is one of my favorite pieces of concept art. It's for the first Dark Souls, and it's the grave of Artorius, a long-forgotten hero of old. The art is incredible, the haphazard nonchalant placement of all the swords, which imply that each sword marks as a gravestone for its original wielder. Your eyes are drawn to a towering monolith with ancient writing commemorating this fallen warrior, and a figure, presumably the player, is warily approaching this mass grave with this trepidation. Now let's see how the area is sculpted from this piece of art as a starting point. And I'd say the 3D artist did a great job interpreting the atmosphere of the original drawing. Especially with how you discover this area. You're relentlessly attacked by bandits and creatures from the dark while running through a forest, and you're just basked by the gentle glow of moonlight. But when you find yourself here, you're met with an ominous silence. As a player, it feels like I'm stepping on hallowed ground, like I should respect this place. Modeling this area in 3D is put to great use when you trigger the cutscene for the boss, called Sif. The camera breaks from the player's perspective and shows various dynamically shifting camera angles to show that you're just being dwarfed by this beast of a good doggo boy. Always a good doggo. There are differences from the original drawing. Most notably to me is the lighting of the area. It's much darker than what the original drawing implied, but that's likely to keep it consistent with the rest of the forest. Even though I love how the final area turned out, I still want to be here. I want to explore this drawing more so than the 3D area. Damn it, it's because I was just wearing underwear, wasn't it? Let me show one more example. This is a concept art for an area in Baldur's Gate 2 called Spellhold, which is an asylum where governments send mages who abuse their power or are seen as a threat to society. It's also very beautifully intricate. The artist has clear mastery of mixed media with inkwork and marker pen, and this is used to show how much this place has decayed to the point of almost being abandoned. The marker pen is used to express tone and the weight of the structure, and how something like this is sitting so alien against its context. The massive structure sits so precariously atop the cliff's edge, as if it's going to collapse at any moment and be washed away by the tides. Now, this is how Spellhold is modeled in the actual game. The artists took the concept art and modeled it in 3D, but then compressed it back into a 2D image. You're going from 2D to 2D rather than 2D to 3D, so it's a lot easier to compare the concept art to how it looks in the final game compared to the previous example. I still love how it's rendered using the 3D assets, but I think there are inherent qualities in the original drawing, such as the expressiveness of the penwork and the great use of marker, that don't translate very well. A lot of finer intricacies of the original drawing are lost. Now, I have a master's degree in architecture, so my bias might be a little skewed, but I think the first drawing is so much more interesting to look at. Spellhold is made of a combination of many complex shapes and volumes. The amazingly detailed hipped roof is intersecting in all sorts of angles and heights, and the undulating surface of the facade with all these balconies and protruding surfaces, and each window is designed so uniquely. It really gives this structure so much personality, like it feels alien and over-designed at points, and there's no physical way something like this can be even constructed in real life, especially as it hangs off the side of the cliff like some cancerous growth. And that adds so much strangeness to the atmosphere. Now, this isn't criticizing how the 3D artists interpreted these concept drawings. I love the design and the layout of the Grave of Artorius so much, and seeing how the artists textured the final area for Spellhold adds a lot of weight and materiality that grounds this structure within its setting. And this makes it feel more believable to walk through. Well, I'm talking a lot about other games more so than Shivering Hearts so far, but I wanted this first video to explain my influences and why I made the creative choices that I did. So for Shivering Hearts, the goal was to create a game that captured the expressiveness and the flair these concept drawings have, to make you feel like you're walking through a piece of concept art that's just brought to life. So I drew upon my many years of traditional pencil and watercolor painting skills, and I wanted to see how I could achieve such a look within RPG Maker MV. While there is room for improvement, I think I've succeeded in this goal largely, and I'm so happy at how it turned out. I think scanning and digitizing these watercolor paintings not only gives a unique aesthetic, but I can traverse a variety of moods through the landscape and character designs. I drew upon my memories of when I visited Japan during the autumn, and I wanted to capture the brimming saturation and the stillness those landscapes elicited from me when creating the village of Shivering Hearts, having it so that you can't even see the ground at certain points because it's under this heavy blanket of red and orange leaves. While I think the village can seem overly saccharine and a bit too saturated, I felt incredible joy and fulfillment painting this and bringing it to life, and that enthusiasm might have translated into this very saturated aesthetic. Painting this almost had a meditative quality to it. I just felt so at peace. I also think autumn marks an important transitionary period between life and death, rebirth and decay, and that also feeds back into the broader themes of the narrative regarding how one can deal with loss and pain and how to deal with the general crushing burden of life. And even now, I want to keep working on the visuals. I would love to spend time animating certain areas like having leaves fall gently to the ground and showing the water flowing down river, grass gently swaying in the breeze. I have all these ideas in my head that I want to execute. And I'm also currently inking the characters and the landscapes based on feedback, and I'm loving how it's turning out so far. It really adds a layer of polish to everything, and I'm planning to upload these videos as a sped up time-lapse onto my YouTube channel. I think this is a good starting video to explain Shivering Hearts and my intentions with the game. It's not a very long game, but I personally found it very fulfilling to create and to think about. There's so much more I could discuss, I'm only touching the tip of the iceberg. I also want to do a thorough walkthrough video to show all the little secrets and different outcomes based on certain choices, because in all honesty, I think it can get quite tedious if you're a player of the game and you want to just see what every choice really shows, but you don't really have the energy to go back and pick every single choice. If there's an aspect of the game you'd like me to discuss, then leave me a comment and I can add it to the pile of topics. Lastly, this would be much further down the line, but I look back at the previous prototype where I explore a large city, and after making Shivering Hearts, I feel so much more confident at pulling off something with this grander scale. But one step at a time, I guess. I just want to keep updating this game, to be honest. Also, if you enjoyed what I had to say in this video, then hit the like and subscribe. I would love to hear any comments as well. Check out and wishlist Shivering Hearts on Steam as well if what you've seen has interested you. And there's also a free demo, so you don't have to commit to a price point. So I think I've said everything I wanted to say in this first video. So remember to take care of yourselves during these tough times, and thanks for watching. See ya!